My son took everything the day my husband's assets were divided, and he signed his name like a man who believed he had already won. Graham didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, picked up the pen, and wrote his name with a flourish that made his lawyer smile. I watched his hand move across the page, steady and confident, as if this were nothing more than a formality, as if this had always been his. "Looks good," Graham said, sliding the papers back across the table. His voice carried that familiar edge of certainty I had raised him with, and now barely recognized. "The story you are about to hear is a work of fiction, created by the Her Chains Channel team, based on real-life situations to convey lessons about family, emotions, and human values. All characters and events are illustrative." Across from me, my lawyer, Nina Castellano, stiffened. Her fingers tightened around her legal pad. She didn't speak, but I saw the warning in her eyes, the quiet plea. This was the moment she had been preparing me for, the moment I was supposed to object. Slow things down. Fight. I didn't. I met her gaze and gave the smallest shake of my head. "Emery," Nina said softly. "Just my name, nothing else." "I understand," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Let him take it all." Graham smiled then. Not at me, at the documents, at the idea of ownership, at the future he thought he had just claimed. His lawyer, Wade Hollis, was the last to sign. He flipped through the packet one more time, slower than Graham liked. I could see my son's impatience flicker across his face. "Is there a problem?" Graham asked. Wade didn't answer right away. He had reached the attachment at the back, the one no one had mentioned out loud. His eyes moved line by line. Then he stopped. Completely. The color drained from his face. "Graham," Wade said quietly, lowering his voice as he leaned in. "We need to talk." My son laughed under his breath. "About what?" "It's done." Wade didn't laugh back. That was the moment everything shifted. Though none of them understood it yet. Not my husband, not my lawyer, and certainly not my son. I sat there, hands folded, listening to my own breathing, thinking only this. The first time Graham said it, I thought I had misheard him. We were sitting across a narrow conference table, the papers still neatly stacked, untouched. Calvin sat to my left, hands folded, eyes fixed on a spot just above the table, as if focus alone might absolve him of what was coming. Graham leaned back in his chair, relaxed in a way that felt practiced. "I want everything," he said, not loud, not angry, just certain. I waited for him to soften it, to add something for now, to manage, until things are sorted. He didn't. Sloane reached for his arm and smiled. The kind of smile people use when they believe they're being reasonable. "It's practical," she said. "This way, there's no confusion later. One person in charge. Cleaner, in charge of what I asked." Graham didn't look at me. He looked at the papers, the house, the accounts, Dad's business interests. All of it. Calvin shifted beside me. I felt it in the table before I heard him breathe. He didn't speak. "I built my life around this family," I said. Careful, keeping my voice steady. "We should talk about how this works for everyone." Graham finally met my eyes, and there was something new there. Not anger, distance. "Mom," he said, "this isn't about feelings. It's about assets." Sloane nodded. "At your age." "Emery, stability matters." Graham's thinking long-term. Calvin cleared his throat. "Graham's right," he murmured, still not looking at me. "Someone has to take responsibility." Responsibility? The word landed wrong. I looked from my husband to my son and realized they had already aligned. Not against me, past me. I wasn't part of the discussion. I was the background they assumed would hold. Graham tapped the folder with his knuckle. "We're not cutting you out," he said. "We're just simplifying. Simplifying. As if my life could be reduced to fewer lines on a page. No one asked what I wanted. No one paused to explain. They spoke over me, around me, through me. And I sat there listening to my son speak in a voice that belonged to someone else entirely. By the time the meeting ended, the decision had already been shaped. I walked out with them, quiet, understanding something I hadn't before. I was no longer being spoken to as a mother. I was being handled like a complication. Nina Castellano didn't waste time. She spread the documents across her desk and spoke with the calm precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times. "You're entitled to a significant portion," she said. "The property, the accounts, the business interests tied to your husband's name. We can challenge the division. We should challenge it." I listened. I nodded when it was appropriate. I let her finish. When she finally looked up, she was waiting for anger, or fear, or at least a list of demands. "I'm not going to contest it," I said. Nina blinked. Once. "I'm sorry what I'm not fighting the division," I repeated. "I'm agreeing to it." She leaned back slowly, studying my face like she was searching for cracks. "Emery, your son is positioning himself to take control of everything. If you don't push back now, you may not get another chance." "I understand the timing," I said. Her pen stopped moving. "Then help me understand the decision." I folded my hands in my lap. They were steady. That seemed to bother her more than if they had been shaking. "I want this finished cleanly." Nina shook her head. "Clean doesn't mean fair, and fair doesn't mean quiet. You don't need to protect anyone here. I'm not—" I said, "I'm choosing." She leaned forward. "Are you tired? Because if this is about being worn down, we can slow it." "It isn't," I said, cutting in gently. "I'm not confused, and I'm not afraid." That was when her expression changed. The certainty slipped, replaced by concern. "You sound like someone who's already lost." I met her gaze. "I sound like someone who knows when to stop speaking." Nina watched me for a long moment. "If you let them move forward like this," she said, carefully, "they will assume you've surrendered." "Let them," I replied. She closed the folder. Not hard, but firmly. "If this goes badly, there won't be much I can do after." "I know," I said. She sighed, clearly unconvinced. "Then I'll prepare the agreement the way they want it. Make sure everything is included." I told her. "Every attachment." Nina nodded, though her eyes stayed on me as if she were memorizing my face for later, when this choice would finally make sense to her. No one ever asked how I managed money. They assumed Calvin did. He liked that assumption. He liked sounding like the man in charge, the one who handled the big things. I handled what lasted. I learned early not to announce it. Quiet habits attract less attention. Separate accounts, separate signatures, separate decisions that never needed approval because they were never shared. Calvin used to tease me about it. "You still balancing checkbooks like it's 1980, he'd say, half smiling. I'd smile back and keep doing it. When the paperwork started circulating, I noticed the language before anyone else did. "I always did. These are standard," Calvin said one night, pushing a folder toward me. "Just sign where they marked it." I flipped through the pages slowly. "Why is this one separate?" I asked, tapping the corner. "That's nothing," he said. "Just an attachment. I don't sign attachments without reading them." I replied. He sighed, irritated. "It's procedural." "Emery, then it can wait," I said, closing the folder. It always waited. Over the years, there were forms I never touched, accounts I was never added to, obligations described in careful language that didn't match the confidence Calvin carried into rooms. I noticed conditions tucked beneath assurances, clauses that leaned heavily on whoever stood last. When Graham started talking about ownership, I went back through everything, quietly. I didn't ask Calvin for explanations. I didn't warn my son. I read, "This is all straightforward." Graham said during one of the early meetings, Dad's name is on everything that matters. That depends on what you mean by matters, I said. He laughed like I was being sentimental. Mom, you worry too much. I let that pass. Calvin never corrected him. Not once. When papers referenced responsibilities, he spoke faster. When signatures were required, he urged efficiency. Let's not complicate things, he kept saying. But the documents were already complicated. They just didn't advertise it. I organized copies in a neat stack at home. Nothing dramatic. Just order. Just readiness. The more I read, the more I understood why no one wanted to slow down. Every page told the same story in a different tone, and none of them sounded like my husband. The notices started arriving before anyone admitted there was a process. Plain envelopes, institutional language. Nothing dramatic, just persistent. I opened them alone at the kitchen table and read them twice before stacking them neatly by date. I didn't throw a single one away. Assumption of responsibility. One letter said, continuing obligation. Said another, liability associated with transfer. Printed in careful, neutral ink. I brought one to Calvin that evening. This came in your name, I said, laying it flat between us. He glanced at it and waved a hand. That's routine. You don't need to worry about those. I'm not worried, I said. I'm reading, he frowned. We don't have time to dissect every piece of mail. Graham wants this handled quickly. Graham echoed that sentiment the next day, louder and with less patience. Dragging this out just makes it messy, he said. If we keep stopping to review everything, it turns into a fight. A fight isn't created by reading, I replied. It is when people start getting cold feet, Sloane added, her tone smooth. Momentum matters. Momentum. Another word that sounded harmless until it wasn't. I stopped bringing the letters to anyone. I made copies instead. I arranged them in a folder by source, then by date. Banks, firms, departments that didn't speak unless something followed the signature. When I asked Calvin why certain obligations were listed separately, he didn't answer the question. He answered around it. Those aren't immediate concerns, he said. They resolve themselves once everything's in one place. And where is that place, I asked. With Graham, he said quickly, too quickly. Graham leaned forward. Mom, we've already talked about this. You either trust us to handle it, or you slow everything down. I trust paper, I said. He laughed. Sharp and dismissive. Paper doesn't matter if you don't own what's written on it. I let him have the last word. I let all of them believe speed was their ally. Every time someone pushed for urgency, I marked it in the margin of my notes. By the end of the week, my folder was thick. Not with answers, but with consistency. Different institutions, same language, same careful distance from reassurance. Whatever they thought they were rushing toward, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing this valuable needed to be hurried unless someone was afraid of what waiting might reveal. Wade Hollis asked for the review the way experienced men do, carefully, as if he already knew the answer. I'd recommend a full financial verification before finalizing, he said, sliding the document across the table. It's standard when ownership consolidates this much. Graham didn't even look at it. We don't need that. Wade kept his voice even. It's a safeguard. For you, for what Graham asked. Smiling, we know what we're getting. I watched Nina from the corner of my eye. She said nothing, but her jaw tightened. Just a formality. Wade continued. An independent review. It protects everyone involved. Graham leaned back. It slows things down. It clarifies them, Wade replied. Graham's patience snapped. I'm not paying for someone to tell me what I already know. Calvin shifted beside him, then said nothing. Again? Wade hesitated. If you decline, I'll need you to acknowledge that recommendation in writing. Fine, Graham said. Give it here. The waiver landed in front of him. Dense, wordy, designed to make people pause. Graham didn't. He signed his name cleanly and pushed it back. There. Can we move on? I stayed still. I didn't nod. I didn't react. I kept my hands folded the way I had learned to do years ago, when reacting too quickly only gave other people leverage. Nina finally spoke. You understand what you're declining, she said. Graham glanced at her. I understand delays cost money. Nina looked at me then. Searching. I gave her nothing. No reassurance. No signal. Just calm. Wade gathered the papers slowly, his expression unreadable. All right, he said. Then we proceed as written. After the meeting, Nina followed me into the hall. You're very quiet, she said. I'm listening, I replied. She lowered her voice. That waiver removes a layer of protection. I know. I said. For him, she added. I stopped walking and looked at her. Exactly. Nina studied my face. The way people do when they realize a decision isn't fear-driven. You've thought this through, she said. Yes, I replied. Long before anyone asked me to speak. Behind us. Graham laughed with Sloane, already planning what came next. His confidence filled the space like a verdict. And for the first time, I understood where the balance had shifted, not because anyone forced it, but because someone chose not to read what they were signing. Graham called that night, his voice loose with confidence. It's finally done tomorrow, he said. I'm thinking of opening a bottle after maybe 2. Celebrate after you sign, Calvin told him in the background. I could hear the smile in his voice. The relief. The kind that comes from believing a problem has been successfully passed to someone else. Sloane took the phone from Graham without asking. I've already made a list, she said. The house needs updates immediately. New flooring, new kitchen. Nothing dramatic. Just tasteful. Something that fits our lifestyle. She said, like the word belonged to her now. Graham laughed. Mom never liked renovations. Too cautious. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment before answering. Caution keeps things standing, I said. Sloane didn't respond to that. She was already moving on. Once everything's transferred, it'll be easier to consolidate accounts. We can simplify. That word again. After the call ended, I sat alone with the documents spread out in front of me. I didn't rush. I never had. I read each page the way I always did, line by line, margin to margin. The addendum was still there. It hadn't been removed. It hadn't been altered. The language remained precise, unemotional, and complete. Ownership, assumption, continuation, responsibilities that followed signatures without asking permission. I marked the page with a small slip of paper, the same one I had used before. Nothing showy, just a reminder to myself. Nina called once before midnight. Everything's ready, she said. Are you sure you don't want to revisit any part of this? No, I replied. She paused. They're confident. I know, I said. When I hung up, I placed the documents back into their folder and set them by the door. I didn't feel nervous. I felt settled. The way I used to feel when I finished balancing accounts down to the last cent. Upstairs, Calvin moved around the house like a man already packing himself into a smaller space. Down the hall, the silence felt intentional. Tomorrow, Graham would get exactly what he had asked for. And tonight, everyone slept believing certainty was on their side. We were back at the table, the same stack of papers between us. The same confidence hanging in the air like it belonged there. Graham reached for the pen again. Let's finish this, he said, already halfway through his signature. Nina watched him without comment. I kept my eyes on Wade Hollis. Wade did not rush. He never had. He turned pages slowly, the way men do when they know speed has already cost someone else. His finger traced the margin as he read, once, then again. When he reached the back of the packet, he stopped. Hold on, Wade said. Graham didn't look up. We've been over this. Wade cleared his throat. This section wasn't discussed. It's boilerplate, Graham said, smiling. Just sign. Wade didn't move. His eyes stayed on the page, then lifted briefly to mine. Something passed between us. Recognition, not agreement, understanding. This is a liability disclosure, Wade said quietly. Graham finally looked at him. So, Wade replied, lowering his voice. It outlines what follows the transfer. Calvin shifted in his chair. Wade, he said. Impatient. We don't need a lecture. Wade ignored him. He leaned closer to Graham, angling the papers so only my son could see. You're assuming ongoing obligations tied to these assets, he said. Personal responsibility. Graham laughed. That's fine. That's what ownership means. Wade's jaw tightened. Read it. Graham waved a hand. I trust you. You shouldn't, Wade said. That got his attention. Graham's smile faltered for half a second before he straightened. You're overthinking this. Wade lowered his voice further. Urgent now. You are taking on more than property. Graham leaned back, grin returning. I'm taking what's mine. I folded my hands and listened to the shift I had been waiting for, the moment when confidence met precision, and realized they were not the same thing. Wade sat back slowly, the color draining from his face as the implications settled. He closed the folder, not with finality, but with restraint. Before you say anything else, Graham said, tapping the pen against the table, I'm signing. And this time, Wade didn't stop him. Wade cleared his throat and turned the folder so it faced Graham. Ownership includes responsibility, he said, his voice stripped of all ceremony. Not just control, not just access, responsibility. Graham stared at the page. You're talking in circles. I'm talking in numbers, Wade replied. He tapped the first section. 3 outstanding mortgages attached to the primary property, each personally guaranteed. That's not right, Graham said quickly. The house is paid off. It isn't. Wade said, It hasn't been for years. Graham laughed, sharp and disbelieving. You're mistaken. Wade kept going. There are business guarantees tied to vendor contracts, lines of credit that renew automatically, obligations that transfer with ownership because you declined a separation review. Calvin shifted. Wade, you asked me to stop slowing things down, Wade said without looking at him. So now I'm being clear. Graham pushed back from the table. This is some kind of trick. Nina spoke for the first time since Wade began. Every item was disclosed, she said calmly. Every attachment was included. Your signature confirms acknowledgement. Graham turned to her. You let this happen. Nina met his glare. You insisted it happen. He looked at me then. Finally. You knew. I read. I said, that's not the same thing. It is, I replied. You just never did. Wade slid the final page forward. When you signed the waiver, you accepted full assumption of all existing obligations, he said. There's no legal ambiguity here. Graham's face flushed. This isn't fair. Nina didn't flinch. Fairness isn't measured after a refusal to verify. The room felt smaller. Graham's confidence collapsed inward, replaced by something frantic. We can undo this, he said. We can revise. Wade shook his head. It's executed. I leaned forward then, not raising my voice, not softening it either. You wanted everything. I said, I gave you everything. The words landed heavily, not because they were sharp, but because they were complete. Graham looked down at the papers again, as if seeing them for the first time. His jaw tightened. He didn't speak. No one rushed to fill the silence. Everything had come due, exactly as written. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They never do. They arrived in envelopes Graham stopped opening. In phone calls he started silencing. In meetings where people stopped using his first name. The confidence he once carried like armor didn't crack loudly. It thinned. Quietly. Until it no longer protected him, Michai. Banks didn't argue. They confirmed. Partners didn't accuse. They withdrew. Institutions didn't care who his father was or what he believed he deserved. One afternoon, he called me. I didn't know. He said, his voice sounded smaller than I remembered. They're saying I'm responsible for all of it. Yes, I replied. You could help, he said. Not asked, said. No, I answered, just as evenly. That was the end of that conversation. Sloane left without theatrics. No fight, no apology. She packed what she brought and walked away when the word obligation started appearing in her own emails. Graham didn't mention her again. Calvin retreated into silence. He stopped explaining himself. Stopped justifying. The man who once spoke confidently about legacy now avoided conversation entirely. There was nothing left to manage. I didn't celebrate. I reorganized. I moved accounts, updated documents, reduced my life to what I actually needed and nothing more. I chose calm over appearances, clarity over noise. For the first time in years, every decision felt like it belonged to me. Here's the life lesson no one teaches you when you're young. Power isn't loud. It's prepared. And boundaries aren't punishments. They're protections that arrive on time. I didn't ruin my son. I didn't take anything from him. I let him keep exactly what he demanded, with every consequence attached. The world enforced what I never had to. Near the end. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it, share it, or leave a comment. Stories like this stay alive because people recognize themselves in them. I'm not angry anymore. I'm accurate, and accuracy lasts longer than revenge ever could.